Content note: this interview includes descriptions of homophobic harassment and violence. Some names have been removed from this interview and replaced with a bleep for privacy.
If you could tell us your name, the date, and where we currently are.
Andre Powell. Today is June the 30th, 2022, the last day of Gay LGBTQ Pride Month. And we're here at Essex Community College, where I graduated from in 1977. And while I was here at Essex, friends that I'd gone to school with, one of them from grade 1 to 12, and other friends that I knew, we all started a gay student union here. And that took quite an effort, I'll say.
Cool. So how do you identify?
I'm a gay male.
Okay. And what year did you begin attending CCBC, and how old were you at that time?
Right after I graduated from Overley Senior High School in 1973, then I came here and began going to school here at what was called then Essex Community College. I was 18 years old, and I went to classes, took some time off, then went to school part-time, then took some more time off with help, I'll say, and then finally came back and finished.
Awesome. So why did you choose to attend CCBC?
Well, it's my mother, on her job where she worked, one of the women she worked with was telling her that she was sending her son to college and out here at Essex Community College. And my mother knew that I wanted to go to college, but with 6 children, they just didn't have the money, to send me to college. So when she found out from her coworker, that it was a community college, much lower rate of going to of tuition than a 4-year college, she said if I wanted to go, I could go here. And since I only I grew up right next door. Here we are in beautiful downtown Rosedale, and my senior high school is only an 8-minute drive away. And then I grew up in Overley in eastern Baltimore County. So, and that's only a 10-minute drive from here at Essex Community College, the Overley Fullerton area of Baltimore County.
Yeah, so you were living pretty close.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what challenges did LGBTQ plus individuals face at CCBC during the 70s?
During the 1970s, it was to realize the Stonewall Rebellion was in New York City in the last weekend of June in 1969. So beginning, we graduated from high school in 1973. It was only 4 years after the Stonewall Rebellion happened. And some parts of the city, of the country, didn't even make an impact. But in other parts, it was recognized, of course, in New York City. And in New York City, there was, following the Stonewall, 3-day rebellion, which was really a rebellion against police brutality, against the queer community. Stonewall was a bar whose patronage was mostly made up of lesbian, gay, and transvestite people of color at that time. And like many bars, it would be raided, of course, raided by the police. That makes the morning news story. New York City police raided the Stonewall Inn, and the following people, the Stonewall Inn, a homosexual bar, and the following people were arrested. So their names are posted and plastered all throughout the news, and they go to work the next morning they don't have a job. Their landlord reads about it. What, you're homosexual? They don't have an apartment or a place to live. That happened not only in New York City, of course, but other cities around, including here in Baltimore. There's a big famous raid at what used to be called the Pepper Hill Bar, which was located around Fallsway and Madison, where the Central Booking Building is now, and the other parts are prison complex. Somewhere around there was the Pepper Hill Bar in Baltimore City. And there's another bar named Cicero's that would be frequently raided by the police also. So this 3-day rebellion was really a rebellion against the police brutality of the community. But the gay community in New York came together and said that's not the only issue. They wanted a bill passed that will protect people from being fired because they were gay. And this is no better indication of why they needed it, because people's names are published in the paper and they get fired and kicked out of their apartments. So the early on after the Stonewall Rebellion, it sort of just helped galvanize the community. And up in New York, they had many protests. Not only, of course, that they would protest against the police hearings, the commissioner hearings, and public meetings of the police department against not only the raids, but also against the vice squad entrapping gay men and arresting them. And of course, that gets published in the newspaper, and they're once again out of a job in an apartment. So it was quite different from what we have today. This month, WJZ Channel 13 every day in their newscast has done something about the pride issue, and that's really admirable. Back in the day, in the early 70s, we couldn't even get the TV news stations to come in and to something that we had. And when they did finally come out in the mid-70s, start coming out to our really meager 5-block long in Baltimore in the early days gay pride parade, the gay activists, we were so very frustrated because all they would show are the drag queens. And we're like, no, we're not all drag queens. This is not representative of our community. And so we had oh gosh, I can't pull the word out of my head, an image problem, helped perpetuated by the media that only showed drag queens. These are gay people, what they want to do. And then, of course, so things were not as open as they were today. You didn't tell very many people. People usually didn't even tell their family until they got old enough to move out and get their own apartment. And then, because that would risk the families being thrown out. I recall one young man came to Baltimore Gay Alliance, and he had told his family that he was gay. And his father said, "Get out of my house." And he was trying to plead with his father, "Get out of the house. I'm your son. Where can I go?" Such and such. The father took him to the living room door and grabbed a 2x4 and held it over his head and said, "You will get out of my house now, or I will crack your skull with this block of wood." And he, of course, naturally, he left, and he called some of the people in Baltimore Gay Alliance and told them what had happened. So one of them, Tim Tasker, that owned his own home and was an architect and had one of the big, beautiful houses in where Waverly and Charles Village sort of meet, and the boundaries stop. One stops, the other starts. And he had several bedrooms in his house. So Tim took the young man in so that he had a place to live. He was only 18 years old. these are what the things that we had to face back in those days. Many people would be kicked out of their house if their families found out they were gay. Unlike today, 40 years later, we've opened up the world's eyes that no longer see us as these horrible, devilish creatures most of the time. And, things are so much better. We've really worked hard to get things out in the open. It took a long time to get decent coverage from TV news, positive coverage from TV news stations. So there wasn't always a Will and Grace. There wasn't always an Ellen that came into the homes and living rooms of America, once a week. There were no movies. There were no Brokeback Mountain movies, or some of the other movies where there just happens to be a gay character. There was no Ugly Betty TV series where one of the co-stars was, a flamboyantly gay man, which is not even frowned upon these days. Back in those days, anything that a man did that wasn't rough and tough and resembled John Wayne and Charlton Heston and Robert Mitchum and the old cowboys was frowned upon, and you were called sissies, and of course the F word, and the atmosphere was just so hostile. So that's a good way to sum it up in the 70s. But there are organizations like the one I eventually joined, the Baltimore Gay Alliance, and different gay activist groups around the country. I use the word gay interchangeably because as we were coming in the 70s, we were gay organizations, and then the lesbians said, we all realized that the lesbians were right. When they start talking about gay, they're not even referring to women, so we began to use the term gay and lesbian community. And then in the mid-90s, I remember I went to New York City for the Gay Pride March, marking the 25th anniversary of Stonewall, and suddenly it was saying lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. And I'm like, oh, okay, all right. So now we have a more full, more complete name for visibility for everyone. So that's a little snapshot of what people were scared of themselves, like me and others. And when I found Baltimore Gay Alliance, oh my gosh, it was like an oasis in the desert. Up to that point, only a few people knew that I was gay. One woman in my neighborhood that lived on the street over from me, and of course she shocked me and told me she was a lesbian. I was like, what? You are? No, you're not. Yes, I am. But she was. Strangely enough, from my little community, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 of us end up being lesbian and gay people. So you just never know.
Yeah. So you mentioned that it was really kind of uncommon to come out at that time. Mm-hmm. But how common was it to live openly as an LGBTQ plus member on CCBC's campus specifically?
Well, I myself and a few friends put our heads together, and since senior high school, I'd been wanting to start a gay student group just so I could meet other gay people. I was in 12th grade at Overly Senior High, and I finally met my first real live other gay person who was in 10th grade, and he was in my drama class. And he was very short, and the drama class is held in the auditorium, and I hear this voice going, excuse me, and I looked this way, nobody was there. excuse me. I looked this way and nobody was there. And I'm thinking, where's this voice coming from saying, excuse me? Finally, I kept looking because he was so short and he had slumped down so low in the chair. And me being taller than a lot of students at that time, pardon me, and I turned and looked over and I looked down and there's this person there and he's asking me about his schedule, and the gym teacher's his name was Mr. Zabedix, but everybody called him Mr. Z. He goes, "Who's Mr. Z?" I said, "That's the gym teacher." Then he goes on to talk about, oh, how he can't stand gym class and such like that. Well, me being a 90-pound weakling in high school, I wasn't very good at gym class either. I went and tried to play the sports stuff as best I could, and really failed, really bad. But eventually I soon picked on that I think this one's gay. And not that point, but maybe a few weeks later, we finally admitted to each other we were gay. And he's the first real live gay person I ever met and came to know in my life. And we're still friends, and still 50 years later, still love and adore each other. He is married, and to his partner. So, and that marriage occurred at one of the gay pride festivals after a vote was taken in the state of Maryland, a referendum vote to approve same-sex marriage, because it passed in Annapolis in the General Assembly, and then a coalition of pastors got together and started a petition drive and said, we want to take it to a referendum and make so the voters of Maryland can say whether they really approve. And I'm so absolutely proud to say that Maryland was the first state in the union to approve same-sex marriage by popular vote. Previous to that, the marriage was approved in Massachusetts by a court hearing. And the judges said, no, you can't deny them this and that. But we were the first. And then I think either Washington State or Oregon was the second. Technically, they were both on the same day, Election Day. But because Maryland comes 3 hours before theirs, we technically were the first. So that's great to hear. So graduating from high school and coming here and not knowing any gay people except the who I'd gone to school with from grades 1 through 12, went to Overly, and we put our heads together. Now, there's a story how the Gay Student Union actually began. It's quite interesting, if I can go on. I was working at a program for college students at the post office, and I saw this guy sitting in the hallway, and I recognized him. I said, hey, he went to Overly. So I went over and talked to him, said, didn't you go to Overly? And he said, yeah. I said, I went there too, but he was a grade before me. Anyway, he was going to Essex, and I was going to Essex. And he had another friend of his. They were putting together a group called the Left Studies Project to be a SGA organization. And they had one component that did left studies, studying socialism. They had a second component that was a women's liberation component. And the third component, they wanted a component, I don't know how they came up with this, a component that would be for gay students also. And now I wonder, how did they come up with that? Because this guy had a girlfriend and she was sort of like a fiance, about to be a fiance, and he was going to become a Baptist minister. Well, that went by the wayside once he met me. I can tell you. So but the group, the Left Studies group, that's where it started out of that. They never did get the women's liberation part of it started. The Left Studies part, they didn't get that started. But I kept going with the gay student organization. In September of 1975, I had run into the Baltimore Gay Alliance at the Baltimore City Fairs, which is what we used to have all this throughout the summer. There were cultural festivals, the German festival, Irish festival, Italian festival, Lithuanian festival, Polish festival, African American festival, and many, many different cultures, festivals, particularly of, European countries. And then in September, they all came together along with the community associations from around Baltimore City and put on the state fair for about 25 years. So I'm Friday evening, get off work and go to the state fair, and I look up and I see this white booth that says Baltimore Gay Alliance with this big yellow banner. And they were selling these yellow balloons that had a lambda on one side. On the other side, it said Baltimore Gay Love. So, here's a fair with pretty yellow balloons, giving them away for free. So, and I'm like, wow, this is a gay group. And I like attached myself to them at the hip. Because when I first came to Essex, I started attending here. I went to the library to see what books did they have something on homosexuals so I can learn what it's all about. And the two that impressed me most was Out of the Closet, Voices of Gay Liberation, edited by Carla J. and Alan Young. The second was called The Gay Militants by Don Teal, Donn, Teal, Teal. And I'm sure they're available online somewhere. Well, The Gay Militants, Out of the Closet, Voices of Gay Liberation was a nice little small book of essays by gay folks that had become activists since the Stonewall Rebellion. The book entitled The Gay Militants really outlined that first year of activities of all various gay organizations that started up, the Gay Liberation Front, the Gay Activist Alliance, and the different type of things that they did in New York City, confronting the police, confronting the newspapers for sensational reporting, and also, demanded they stop printing the names of people arrested in gay bars because it was making them lose their jobs in their apartments. And after a year of these activities, such as a ZAP, they'd walk in on a meeting of the library commissioners in the middle of the meeting, just go in and walk up and take over and say, we're here to such and such and protest this. Why are there no books that are in your libraries available that address the issues of homosexuals and lesbians? Because there were a few books around. More of a, how should I say it? Scholarly is probably too strong a word to use, but it was scientific basis or theoretical basis like that. And so they would protest that. They would, of course, zap the hearings of the police commissioners when they would have public hearings as the why they're raiding the bars, and the Vice Squad is wasting their time in trapping people for victimless crimes. So after a year of that type of organizing, the activists got together and said, we've got to mark what happened a year ago, the Stonewall Rebellion. And they started in 1970, the first Christopher Street Gay Liberation Day March. It wasn't called a parade because they weren't parading and saying, hi, they were marching as part of a protest against the harassment and oppression of the gay community in New York City. And that caught on there, and a few years later it caught on in other cities around the country, and now we have pride all over the world, except maybe Antarctica. But it really has caught on. So those were the activities that led up to this. And having read those books, when I met Baltimore Gay Alliance, who would meet 40 people meeting in downtown Baltimore every 2 weeks, we talked about it, and I talked to some of the people. I said, sure, it'd be nice to have a gay student group out at Essex. It's like, I know there's gay people because I see them in the bars. When I go downtown, I recognize the students. Oh, that one goes to Essex. That one goes to Essex too. And even though the Left Studies projects all the components didn't make it, I kept going with the gay student organization, and I talked to and the guy that I went to school with that first, conceived the Left Studies project. He had stopped going to school and started working after like a year or two, and I kept going to college. So I went over here to the student center, as it was called back then, and went to the activities office and told them I wanted an application to apply for recognition as a gay student organization, I and several friends. So we did, and they gave us the application. Now, here's where a pause comes in. I wrote a nice article in the Montage, which at that time the Montage was only 4 pages long. So I wrote a letter to the editor of why there is a need for a gay student organization here at Essex Community College and the problems that we suffered from gay oppression. And they published it. Well, it took up the whole second page of that weekly issue of the Montage. I remember talking to one of our teacher who was not gay, but contacted me and said, I'd like to be a student advisor. So we ended up with 3 faculty advisors, So we ended up with 3 faculty advisors for the group. And I said, I was talking to him, I said, so when I wrote that letter to the editor of the paper that week, he goes, your letter to the editor was the paper for that week, because it really did took up the entire second page. They couldn't get anything else, hardly anything else in, except for a few advertisements, and of course, on the back of it, the sports section. Well, after I put in that application, another group of students decided they wanted to have be part of the Student Government Association, have a recognized group. That was the Ku Klux Klan. Some of the members, I know the students named and some other members that lived down in Essex, out past Eastern Boulevard area, way down there, decided they wanted to start a KKK student group. Well, the original friend of mine that wanted to start the Left Studies Project, we got a hold of friends of ours, and said they want to start a KKK student group at Essex. We don't want them on campus. And there were members of an organization called Youth Against War and Fascism, and they came out every week.
Okay. Should we pause for a second? Okay. I'm so sorry. No, you're good. Because there's work going on campus today or something. That'll happen from time to time.
And now we pause for a moment from our sponsors.
You can put an average in here.
Yes.
So that'll happen here. Like we'll be in class or something, and like there'll be some work going on or people talking in the hallway.
As long as it's not a saw.
Yeah, really.
Because that penetrates the sound barrier. Okay. All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. At that same time, a group of students that lived in the Essex area decided they want to start a KKK student group. So my friend that originally started the Left Studies Project, we called up friends of ours from Youth Against War and Fascism organization. They came out every Wednesday during the free hour time, which was noon to 1 o'clock, and met with students out here and organized weekly to build a campaign to stop the KKK student group from being recognized. Well, you can imagine the administration, what they were going through at this time. 1975, they have an application from a group wanting a gay student union organization on campus, and they have an application from a group wanting a KKK student group on campus. The president at that time was Dr. Vernon Wanty, and the dean of students was Donald Slowinski. So the administration put their heads together and said, right now, there's a moratorium on recognizing any more student organizations until we can define a specific definitive policy. This took about a year or so for them to come up for the policy. And when they finally came up with the policy, they let me know, okay, that they're back in just a moment. And the head of Jim Duffy was the head of the activities director over in the student activities building. So he let me know that, okay, they're accepting applications again. So I don't know, I don't recall if I did a new application or used the same one. And meanwhile, the KKK student organization had all filtered off and no longer pursued getting recognition. So they started all over again. And then the activities director called me and said, it was Jim Duffy, and his assistant was, I think her name was Betty Saar, S-A-A-R, I believe. And they called me and said, well, the president of the college wants to meet with me. I said, he does? I was totally surprised. Why does the president want to meet with me? So I called up, and several members of Baltimore Gay Alliance were lawyers. So I called up our lawyer, John Love. I said, listen, the moratorium on getting student groups recognized as SGA has now been lifted, and we have another application. And they just called and told me that the president of the college wants to speak with me or with us, with the group. So we discussed it and for a little while, and we determined that I should go in and speak for the group by myself, because they may be trying to say, let's see how big this menace is. And if it's like 25 people, then they may have to do something. If they find it's only a small amount of people, which it was, we ended up with 6 people, then they might say, oh, that's small. We can brush them off somehow. So I went and started the first of several meetings with President Wanty and Dean Slowinski. One of the things I did, there was a pamphlet called 10 Questions About Homosexuals that we often took down to the Maryland General Assembly and to the legislature as we were trying to get a gay rights bill passed back early on, back then in the mid-'70s. So I made Xerox copies of that for Dr. Wanty and Dean Slewinski. I also, out of it's a small, oh gosh, what do they call them? They called them pocketbooks because they were small, I guess could fit in a pocketbook. But there was a book called The Rights of Gay People by the American Civil Liberties Union. They also had numerous other books called The Rights of Women, The Rights of some disabled, Rights of something else. So in the book, The Rights of Gay People, they cited a case down in one of the district appeal courts for the United States, down out of the court that's in Richmond, Virginia. And it cited a lawsuit from the Gay Student Organization versus Virginia Commonwealth University. Virginia Commonwealth University didn't want to recognize the gay student group, as happened in many campuses around the country at that time. Remember, this is the mid-1970s. It wasn't an everyday word. When you got called queer in the 1970s, that word was usually followed by rocks and sticks and bottles being thrown at you. It was like the N-word at the time. So I took that portion of the book, that chapter that talked about the rulings and the lawsuit brought on by the Gay Student Organization at Virginia Commonwealth University, and what the ruling of the judges after they heard the original courts in Virginia sided with the university, and the students kept appealing up to the appeals court. And the appeals court ruled that if Virginia Commonwealth University recognized any other group as a student organization and gave them the full rights and benefits, they could not deny this group of homosexual students the right also. So I went to the University of Baltimore Law Library, and don't ask me how I managed to get through that and find out and figure out where it was, but I found the book for the rulings of the court, or out of the Virginia law, and Xeroxed that and talked to our lawyers in Baltimore Gay Alliance. Then I brought those in with another meeting with Dr. Wanty and Dean Slewinski and showed them that here, so this has been upheld through the appeals court that they do have the right, and it continues to say our lawyers. You continues to use that phrase, so they knew we had lawyers, and thankfully, Dr. Wanty and Dean Slewinski came to the right decision and said, well, we at this point in time, we certainly accept the application for the Gay Student Union as a student organization. So we had a gay student union here, the Essex Community College Gay Student Union. And our first meeting was in January of first official meeting, January 1977. We met on the second floor of the administration building. That was a little bit of a chore trying to figure out where to meet. And, I talked it over with the original three people, four people, and there were two, and said, let's meet in the administration building. I scouted out a place on the second floor because the administration building doesn't have that many classrooms, doesn't have a lot of traffic. And I said, if we meet in one of the other buildings, and we only had about 3 or 4 buildings at the time here at Essex. And I said, if we meet in the other buildings, we run the risk of people walking down the hall saying, oh, that's where the gay group meets. Let's see who's in their meeting, So we found a little place room in the corner, that second floor of the administration building that worked well. Eventually, we had about 6 people. Some more people came and joined on and kept coming and attending, and we all got to be very good friends. We didn't get any money for any activities at that time because it was 1977, and they knew I was graduating, and that as the leader. So they explained to me, we know that you're graduating, in June of 77, and we don't know who's going to be here to take it over, next semester. So they didn't want to put forward any money in case there was no one else there to take it over. So sometimes you have the foresight to make the right decision. So that was the extent of the first original Essex Community College Gay Student Union. We were assigned over in the Student Union building on the bottom floor. They had an area, and it's where all the desks, they call them, I think, carrels. This is what they were called. And you had a space with your desk with the drawers and place for you to put your sign for your student organization. So we had a poster board about this size that they made for all the SGA groups, and it was royal blue with gold, and it said Gay Student Union meeting Fridays, free hour Fridays, administration building, and I think it was room 205, and we had that posted there, and we had about 6 or 7 of those posted on different bulletin boards throughout the campus. So we only had 6 people. That was, to us, we were overjoyed. At least we had our group, we had our organization. It took quite something to go through. We certainly didn't expect a moratorium to be called, but we understood when students wanted to start a KKK group that the administration said, "Oh, hold on now, let's stop this and examine this issue a little further." Perhaps they were thinking that we'll do this moratorium and maybe these students will graduate and go away. Well, one of them didn't go away. Now, I will tell you I spent a little more time at a community college than I was supposed to, because the guy that I met in the post office that went to high school that started the Left Studies group, well, he didn't quite make it to becoming a Baptist minister, and he broke up with his fiancée. But he did live with me. We ended up being partners, living together for a number of years, from 1979 to 1985. So I brought him out of the closet, much to my surprise. I thought you were going to be a Baptist minister. He goes, "Oh, never mind." I said, "What about your fiancée? She can find somebody else." And I took him to the gay bar, the Hippopotamus, the dance disco. He said, "Let me see what it's like." Well, I took him in once, and I never got him out of the bar. We ended up going to the bar almost every night. And of course, when you do that and the bar closes at 2:00, you don't make it to your 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock classes in the morning. And we both ended up getting academically dismissed. So then, after you were academically dismissed back then, you could come back to class with a limited amount of classes. So I think I was only allowed to come back and take 2 classes that next semester, which of course we failed our classes, so that's why we got academically dismissed, which happens when you don't go to them. But came back on probation and lifted my grade point average back up to 4 point something, which isn't hard to do with 2 classes. When I got to 4 classes, it was a little more difficult. But that's quite a story. I'm telling you, compared to now. When I graduated, if I can say, from Essex in June 1977, I then transferred to Towson State University, as much of Essex students at that time are sort of geared to go to Towson or some other state college. And I ran into even more friends from the bars out there and said, hey, we had a gay student group at Essex. Why don't we get one here at Towson? And I think there might have been one at Towson years ago, but as people graduate, so goes the group. And we, at Towson, the procedure was a bit different. You had to get a petition signed with 29 signatures in order to even put in your application as a student at a government organization. So luckily, between me and some other friends out there, we came up with 29 students that we know that go to the bars downtown and that were on campus, and applied out there at Towson. And that course was not a completely smooth road either, but as always in the Student Government Association, there were people that would say, oh yeah, they have a right. This is 1978 at this time. They have a right to have a group. And then there were always the others that said, no, we don't want them on campus. A large part of the opposition at Towson came from the religious-based organizations, coming out throwing those Bible quotes at us and saying, we don't want those people on campus there. So that was it got contentious just a little bit. The president of the SGA, he was sort of on our side. He wasn't neutral, but he wasn't in strong opposition to it. He stated to the Tower Light newspaper at the time, well, he had some moral qualms about there being a gay dance on campus. And the reporter then put in parentheses, the guy's name was the reporter put in parentheses, like, this guy is the nephew of the Archbishop Lawrence Cardinal Sheehan. And the way that he wrote the article, he was saying figures for the nephew of Archbishop Lawrence Cardinal Sheehan, figured he'd be against gay folks, which was, so I had to go run to the president of the SGA and apologizing all over the place. I had no idea he was going to write that in the newsletter. That's not fair for him to do that to you, and understood. And finally, through his support for approval, I think it passed with a good majority. It wasn't a very tight vote. Ended up passing at Towson State University. So we were the Towson State University Gay People's Alliance, and we didn't get any money again, but we did have a coffee house, where we had sodas, and of course it was the time of the disco era, so we had a record player playing disco music and recorded songs like that. So it was a nice little coffee house that we had. Eventually I stopped going to school and started working again. But and several others there kept the Gay People's Alliance going for several years after that. So back in the 70s, it was sometimes a rough struggle, sometimes an easy struggle, but it was nonetheless, and I think it's safe enough for me to say in other organizations around the country that there were the same type of struggles going through, trying to get recognition. And some of the colleges managed to get recognition and some didn't, which is quite different from today, when even in senior high schools, there's something, I think it's called Gleason Gay and Lesbian Education Network, or some kind of supportive, diverse orientation groups that are in some senior high schools, and many campuses now have LGBTQ supportive groups that are not just LGBTQ, but support mixed for LGBTQ plus straight allies there in supporting the group. And that's a wonderful thing. That is just wonderful. When I used to go to the gay pride parades up in New York City, and there were so many college groups that would come by, and they had a nice banner marching down, first marching up 6th Avenue, and then when the parade changed in the 90s and said, we're going down 5th Avenue, the different college groups from around up and down the East Coast, even over to like Ohio and Tennessee, would come to New York just to march in New York's Pride Parade. The issue with New York's Pride Parade, when it originally started, Christopher Street Gay Liberation March, it started in Greenwich Village outside the Stone Wall, and it would march up 6th Avenue to Central Park, where they'd have a big rally with a lot of political talks and such like that. Because that was the atmosphere at the time in the 70s, it must be understood, coming on the heels of the Black liberation movement and the women's liberation movement. There was a much higher political plane for organizations that were fighting, that were not mainstream organizations, that were fighting for the rights against the the terrible oppression that Black folks suffered and that women suffered. It's amazing to me, some 50 years later, I still don't understand it, how the Equal Rights Amendment, which I believe passed in the U.S. Congress in 1973, has not passed as a constitutional amendment. It's really, I believe, 7 or so words. I don't know the exact phrasings of, but it shall not be denied such and such on the basis of sex. The Congress passed it, but for a constitutional amendment, it has to be approved by a certain amount of states around the country. I want to say 2/3, but I'm not sure if that's the correct formulation. But they couldn't get 2/3 of the state legislatures in the country to pass this. You have about 7 years to get a constitutional amendment passed, and it's to me it's just amazing, absolutely amazing that it has not passed yet. And here we are 50 years later, and we still don't have an Equal Rights Amendment. So that's a little summary of what it was like, things we had to go through politically in the 1970s. Here, of course, now we have gay everywhere. I remember Anita Bryant, who in 1977 in Dade County, Florida, led a campaign to use the referendum process to overturn the county commissioners who approved an anti-discrimination policy based on sexual orientation. And we were gaining momentum. At that time, we had one in Howard County, Maryland. The county council there passed an anti-discrimination ordination saying you can't discriminate based on sexual orientation. Other cities and states around the country. And then they went to Dade County. So the right wing galvanized behind Anita Bryant at that time. And she had a campaign called Save Our Children from Homosexuals. Of course, she came out in a lie. They can't have children of their own, so they have to recruit in order to keep growing. And we tried telling people, we didn't recruit, we enlisted. We weren't recruited, we enlisted on our own. So she set us back, the gay civil rights movement, a number of years. And even as I talked to her earlier about the referendum here in the state of Maryland to overturn the General Assembly's approval of same-sex marriage, that began with Anita Bryant, because after she did that successfully, other states and counties around the country did it. I know also in Colorado they had a referendum vote that took away the anti-discrimination protections. And then about 15 to 20 years later, Colorado came to their senses and put it back in. And some other states that successfully, through referendum, overturned it. And if we bring it up to date, this Supreme Court ruling that overturned Roe versus Wade, saying that on the federal level, every woman has their right to choose for themselves whether or not they have an abortion. We are very disturbed at the opinion of Justice Clarence Thomas, who was not satisfied that Roe versus Wade was overturned. He's trying to, basically, he's put out the call, I feel, and many other people in my organization in Baltimore feel, he's put out the call through this opinion that let's go after the other ones, as he talked about going after same-sex marriage, and there's another one I can't quite think of that he said we should also roll back. So once again, we have work to do. We have a battle that's coming on. States may try to challenge the same-sex marriage as they, it has been challenged. I think it was at Kansas or Kentucky, where the clerk would not grant the license because she said her personal religious beliefs didn't allow her to issue such a license. Well, she's not issuing the license. It is not hers. It's the state of, I know it was one of the cases, Kansas or Kentucky. I think Kentucky. It's a state that's granting the license. She's just a clerical person like anybody else that's doing it. It's not her private domain. And as such, she's hired to do a job that the state says, you do this job. If she doesn't do that, the state can, if they want, use that right to say she's insubordinate and fire her. But of course, the state is not quite as progressive as we expect, particularly on the issue of LGBTQ rights. So they didn't fire her, as far as I can recall. It's been a number of years. But those kind of lawsuits, I think we can expect more and more of those to come about, particularly with regard to same-sex marriage. And there's another, oh gosh, I wish I could recall because that's the one that's closest to me, same-sex marriage. I can't read the other one that Justice Clarence Thomas alluded to actually outlined in his opinion, that we should go after these private rights that people have been entitled to.
I think it was contraceptives.
Yes, contracept. Thank you. The right of contraceptives. So our fight is still going. We're light years away from where we were in 1975. Over the years, past 50 years, I've been on television and radio and newspaper and talking. And what we wanted back in the early 70s, besides having the anti-discrimination protections, is to make the world a better place for those children that were going to grow up and realize that they're queer children, that they would have a safe space, a safe place to live in, not be subjected to all the taunts and crap that we were subjected to for being gay as teenagers or as young adults. And it's really saddened to see. It really speaks to this country that there's so much bullying going around, not only bullying toward queer youth, but bullying in general. I mean, we stand up and they taught us the Pledge of Allegiance when we were kids. We had to say every day in school, liberty and justice for all. That's such a lie, such a lie. Teenagers are growing up, harassing, bullying other teenagers, and there's something available now that we never even dreamed of and imagined. It's called a little smartphone connected to the internet, and teenagers can bully anybody for anything, for their body shape, for the way they dress, the way they do their hair. If the child's not gay, maybe their parents are two gay men or two lesbians, they can get bullied and harassed for that. What kind of culture have we developed that children grow up and as teenagers to get such delight? Oh, look at this, let's bully this and post it. Some that leads people to suicide like they did Trevor. And Trevor's not the only queer teenager that has committed suicide due to bullying. Or even if it's not a queer teenager, a teenager that's been bullied in school or in their neighborhood, that would lead them to suicide, to self-destruct. If not actual suicide, self-destruct through drugs and alcohol at such a young age. We wanted better than that. So we've gotten it for queer children who can now come out. When I went to Baltimore Pride 2 weeks ago, I was just standing there watching. It was like, look what we did back in Baltimore Gay Alliance when we started the first Pride celebration, a rally at Mount Vernon Place with 1 year, 40 people, the next year, 36 people. And then we went on to do block parties for Gay Pride Month. And then we started to do more block parties, and eventually somebody said, let's have a Gay Pride parade, after going up to New York with all their Gay Pride parades, which we did from the Baltimore Gay and Lesbian Community Center. Every year would take a bus up to the Gay Pride parade in New York. We said, let's do one in Baltimore. So now we have one. And I was just looking at all the youth that were out marching in the Gay Pride parade, now up to date. That back in the 70s, it was mostly adults, of course. And then there were a few bold teenagers that found their way to Baltimore Gay Alliance. One was 15, one was 16, and we took them in. They were young teenagers. We loved that they were teenagers and proud and open about being gay and made no apologies for it, which we couldn't do in our teenage years. But now, my gosh, there's so many of the groups and organizations. Of course, I am I turned 68 next week, so they all kind of look young to me. So, but it's wonderful to know that it's a goal you strived for over the years. It's there. We've achieved it. They can come out there in their young 20s. They're out to their parents, their families, cousins. Most of them, I think, have been accepted. There are still some parents that don't want to accept their children. I remember coming here several years ago and talking to the Rainbow Club here at Essex, and there was one. We had about 20-some people, 25-some people in the meeting, and there was one young student. His parents were very conservative, very religious, and he wasn't sure whether to come out to them or not. And people were saying, well, eventually you got to tell them. And I'm like, you don't live in this man's house. You don't live in his house. And I'll always remember the youth that came to us that told us how his father stood with the 2x4 over his head at 18 years old, said, I'll crack your head open if you don't get out of this house. You don't know their reality, so you can only encourage them so much. And my encouragement would be, he lives with them every day, so he knows how they feel. And if he doesn't want to come out to them, that's his decision. We stand up and fight for the right to choose, so that's his right to choose. And then when he graduates from college and moves out and gets his own apartment, then he can tell. He can tell them. Then they can't say, get out of my house, because, hey, he lives on his own, taking care of himself. And maybe they'll have calmed down by then, perhaps. But there are some of the things that we have to still deal with today. But it's overwhelmingly, 50 years later, it's so tremendously better. Mm-hmm. I mean, Anita Bryant used to say, one of her quotes was, there's a book called The Love That Dare Not Speak Its Name. And she goes, well, now it's the love that won't shut up. Because gay people in 1970s, we were popping up everywhere. Well, dear Anita, you should go see Brokeback Mountain, Anita, you think. Academy Award-winning movie for Best Director. And it's good. It's good. And my optimistic view is that with the advent of these wonderful smartphones, those queer teenagers that are isolated, whether it's the far reaches of Western Maryland or the lower reaches of Eastern Shore, Maryland, or out in Wyoming, or heaven forbid, Utah, Montana, states like way out there, where a youth would grow up and feel isolated, that they have that smartphone there to reach out to another part of to be able to reach out to the community, talk to other queer students, or let it be a lifeline to them until, as such, they can get out of where they are if it's that oppressive where they live. So that's what we tried to do back in the 70s. It was great to start a gay student union at Essex and then go on to help start another one at Towson University. If I could tell you now at Towson University, I went out there for National October 11th, National Coming Out Day, because they were having some events. And I got off work and went out there, and the events were all over. But I talked to some of the faculty advisors and told them about the Gay People's Alliance that we helped start back in 1978 at Towson. Well, at Towson, they have 4 different LGBT student organizations. That's a general organization. Then there's one for Asian students. Then there's one for Latinx students. And then there's one for African American students, which has about 200 members. I'm like, what? I was fainted, passed out on the floor. You got 4 groups? And the African American one that has 200 students? Wow. I don't even know if we had 200 African American students when I went there back in the 70s. Good gracious. Let alone 200 that are that are queer students. So I'm encouraged and optimistic. We will keep going, but we we must not forget the political aspect of what we are and what we built as a movement. It's not just a party anymore. I'm encouraged that in New York City there's a Reclaim Pride Coalition that holds a queer liberation march, which is now, I just attended I think the third one because of COVID, it was shut down. And it's now an alternative to the Heritage of Pride, which has become so commercialized, full of corporate vans advertising, full of politicians advertising. And of course, one of the biggest complaints among the queer community and the most progressive activists is that for gay pride marches, there are uniformed police units. And it's like they've lost sight that the movement began as a protest against police brutality. And even though it's not as bad as it was back in the 70s, there's still good evidence of mistreatment of the queer community by the police, not only here in Baltimore, but all around the country. So long live the Queer Liberation March. Remember, originally, that day was called the Christopher Street Gay Liberation Day March.
So one of my last questions is going back to the Essex Community College Gay Student Union that you helped found. Why do you think it was important when you were involved?
To break any young gay student out of the isolation, because you're at home. Look at my case. I'm the only gay person in the family, and you don't know anybody else in your neighborhood that's gay, even though years later I found out 5 of us were eventually. And it's support is needed, because we're not offered that. Back then we weren't offered that support in society that will say, oh, you're a gay student. The only thing we got were rocks, sticks, and bottles thrown at us. Horrible names, mistreatment. You're sick. Something's wrong with you. Well, we came together. It was important that we come together in solidarity with each other back then, because we know that there's nothing wrong with this. That being, as a movie is called, being gay is a very natural thing. And it's very important for the gay students to come together and have a safe place. If they didn't have a safe place at home, if they didn't have a safe place in their neighborhoods, if they didn't have a safe place in church, back in the early 70s, most of the churches were not safe. They could at least come once a week here to the Gay Student Union and be with other gay students and have a safe place and get some positive reinforcement from each other.
Awesome. Well, those were all of my questions. So thank you for everything. It was interesting to hear about CCBC and the group that you founded at that time. So thank you for your time.
You're quite welcome. We in no way thought we thought we might get some opposition, but not that much. But working with the Baltimore Gay Alliance and their lawyers, and the meeting with Dr. Wanti and Dean Slowinski, and keep repeating that phrase, our lawyers. So, and the lawyers would have simply loved to have taken on a case like this here in the state of Maryland. They were sort of salivating. Oh, yeah, that's right, tell them this. They don't do it, they don't approve it, we'll sue.
Yeah.
we got the basis in the Virginia Commonwealth University to back us up. So, well, it worked. It worked, certainly did. So it was a joy. We're glad we did it. I'm glad I did it. And then And now to hear that the Rainbow Club started, I'm like, oh, there's another student group. And I somehow found Dr. Morgan Slusher, and stopped by to see him to talk about it. And every once in a while I would attend the Rainbow Club meetings. And now in the Rainbow Club, because as people graduate, move on, is merged with, I think, one or two other groups, and now it's called the Progressive Student, what's the third word? Alliance. I was right. Okay. Mm-hmm. Progressive Student Alliance. So that's good.
Did anyone, just one more follow-up question. Did anyone continue the Essex Community College Gay Student Union, or did it end after you left?
It ended after I left. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but it was good while we had it, and it was good that we had it. That's the legacy of the Essex Community College Gay Student Union in its first birth. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm very glad to see successive births, and now, just like so many other colleges and universities, we have an ongoing organization for queer students.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing your story, and I appreciate you coming out today.
Certainly. No problem.